Today, we begin with my revealing, a real issue that exists across most Christian denominations. I will tell you about one of the most innovative ideas that I ever had that I did absolutely nothing with. I share a question that I asked on Reddit, and how the answers I received, they genuinely surprised me, all on the way to answering the really unusual question: can you explain your faith to an alien?
Welcome to the Sky Pilot podcast that explores questions of faith, spirituality, and religion. I'm Dan Matthews, and I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy the questions. Welcome to the podcast where every question is an invitation into a spiritual quest, and you're invited along for the journey.
Hi, I'm Dan, this is Quark, and we're going to be your guides on today's faith quest. Now, there is a strange phenomenon amongst Christians, and I would say it's actually pretty consistent across denominations as far as I've seen. And here it is. I'm just going to say it straight out, and then I'm going to explain myself. We don't know what we believe. Now, immediately there are Christians listening or watching who say, oh, I do. But here's what I found. There are plenty of people, plenty of Christians who will tell me that they think some other person's version of Christianity is wrong. These people will tell me and explain why some other person is not really a true Christian. Now, we tend to think that making a judgment of someone else's faith is the same thing as declaring and understanding our own. But it isn't. Look, I've served in churches with outspoken liberals and diehard conservatives, and what I've just said is true across the board. So about 15 years ago or so, I came up with an idea. There should be a regular interval at which every member of a congregation makes a public proclamation of faith, their own personal faith. I don't mean, oh yeah, that's what we do when we get baptized. I mean regularly during your faith journey.
But isn't this already done? In many places, people recite the Nicene Creed together, or they stand up and say the Apostles' Creed. Some even say a Christian version of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, that's actually a great distinction. This isn't a litmus test that I'm talking about, where you stand up and say something to make a point, or it's not a kind of let's all read something together to make sure that we're on the same page. I see this as a time in which you do some deep thinking about what you believe. You take some time, process it, write it down, and finally, then at some point when you're ready, you say it to the congregation. Now, I would probably limit it to no more than 3 minutes. I know that doesn't seem like a lot of time, but I don't want people to try to answer the full depth and breadth of what they think the Christian faith says. Just tell us what you believe. The point is not to be evaluated. The point is to, push the person who's doing this exercise to think, really think about what they believe. And then also the point is to get those who are listening to really think about what they believe as well, and come to grips with the breadth of how much variance there is, even within one single congregation. Now, I should say I never made this a tradition nor an expectation anywhere where I served, because there would have been an open rebellion. But I still think it's a good idea. Maybe something like every 7 years, that sounds about right. There might have to be a class to help, not to direct, but just several weeks of meeting once a week to help the person by asking them some thoughtful questions so they can work through, the person can work through what he or she believes. Now, there's a tendency to say, look, we have the Nicene Creed, and that tells us what we believe. We don't need anything else. First, the Nicene Creed was created as more of a reaction against the things that were not going to be tolerated. It was kind of barriers and boundaries more than the essential statement of what is believed. Next, even if you say that you will and do buy into the entire Nicene Creed as your personal statement of belief, that leaves so much of your personal faith life, out of the picture to me. I'm willing to guess that you can read the creed and put all of the elements in it as you go through them one by one, put all of the elements into 3 categories. The first category would be, I believe that. The second category might be, I'm not sure I actually do believe that. And the third category is, yeah, I believe it, but it isn't really important to my daily faith journey. And that is the crux of the issue. What I think we all need is an occasional exercise in which we are forced to work through what is important to our daily faith journey, and then leave everything else out. Not because it doesn't matter, not because it isn't true, but because it isn't where your focus is right now. So recently I went on to Reddit, and if you don't know what Reddit is, just very briefly, it's a social media platform essentially divided into many electronic bulletin boards, each revolving around a topic. Now, if you have a passion for something, scuba diving, underwater photography, bluegrass music, growing succulents, American history, collecting watches, climbing Kilimanjaro.
Oh, like searching for extraterrestrial life and proving the existence of UFOs.
Yeah, literally almost anything. You can find a group of people talking about it there. So I went to one of the groups on Reddit that I enjoy called Open Christianity. Now, this group is admittedly kind of a progressive-leaning group of Christians, but simultaneously surprisingly traditional in their viewpoints as well. And it's a really nice place where people who want to think openly about various elements of their faith are safe to do so. So I went to this Reddit group and asked them to describe their own faith. My post was titled, "Describe Christianity Simply." Now, I really wanted to phrase this question in a particular way. This is what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, you meet someone not from here. I mean, really not from here. A space alien. And this alien asks you about your faith, your personal faith. Tell them what you believe.
Oh, yes, I do like this question.
Yeah, I thought that you might. The purpose of making it an alien, in my mind, was to get away from any assumed knowledge. But in the end, I knew that the whole space alien theme probably would just turn people off. So instead, I wrote this. You meet someone who's never really heard of religion or faith. Recently, though, this person has heard that you are a Christian and asks you what Christianity is. This isn't a moment for a dissertation. Imagine you have limited time, say a commuter bus ride. Now, I also went on to give some further background to my question that I was asking. And I said, explanation. I believe religion happens at three basic levels. The authority level, these are the people in leadership of the faith or the scholars who don't actually have a lot to do with the people who are in the pews. Then there's the clerical level. These are people who are most often the leadership who we interact with, those of us who are lay people, we interact with them as spiritual leaders in our local congregation. Think of them like clergy. They don't have to be clergy, but think of them as clergy. They often are. Then finally, the lay level of these, which these are the everyday members of communities of faith or belief groups. And I would argue that these three groups often see the faith that they share in very different ways. So, as I said in what I was writing, I'm in the second group. I'm a retired clergy person, but I'm interested in hearing from lay people as to how they would describe the essential beliefs and elements of their own personal Christian faith. Now, first let me say that going to a Reddit group that focuses on talking about Christian faith immediately narrows the kind of person I'm going to be asking, and I will say that was very intentional. I wanted to ask the question somewhere where I was going to encounter people who were inclined to actually answer the question. I will also say that I was very anxious that I would get a bunch of Bible quotes. It wasn't going to be particularly helpful nor illuminating if I had a bunch of people answering with things like John 3:16. But I got some really wonderful answers. Humorous Bones, I love that name. Humorous Bones answered this way. Basically, there are two rules that we try to live by, even though we know they're impossible to keep 100%. Number one, love God. In practice, this means humility, accepting that you aren't the center of the universe, and taking this world and this life as a gift and a responsibility. Learning more about Christianity will help you love God. Number two, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the essence of morality, that selflessness is good and selfishness is not. There's just as much complexity with this point as the first, and again, I believe learning more about Christianity will help here as well. Now, let me say that the point of this exercise that I gave is not to see if I judge them as being correct, but having said this, in this case, I could read that and say, as a Christian, yes, that describes well the faith that I know and a lot of the elements that I follow. Also, this one very cleverly did quote the Bible without actually quoting the Bible. Mark 12:30 through 31, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Okay, let me give you another that I thought was very well phrased and thought out. This is a person who goes by the screen name Nogrith, and he gave me a 15-second answer and then added a 60-second additional time answer, which I thought was clever. Nogrith had this to say, 15-second explanation. Christianity is the idea that we can make the world a better place by sacrificing our own self-interest to help other people. We believe this attitude was embodied by Jesus Christ, particularly when he gave himself up to death on a cross in order to reveal the truth of this to the world. Then he says, additional detail for 60-second explanation. Christians are convinced that the first century teacher called Jesus the Nazarene was the perfect human embodiment of God, and that his life should be the template for our own. Through the teachings of Jesus, we are convinced that the God of the universe is perfect goodness and perfect love, and we worship that goodness and love as the truest way of life, because we trust that the Christ Jesus perfectly represents that truth, way, and life. We are convinced that everyone can become like God through trusting the example of the Christ as our highest authority, and no one can become like God except by following that example. Now, again, let me point out that we're not looking for answers with which we agree. And here's the question that I think will help sort out this process. Do you, after hearing the person's answer, do you have a sense of what that person believes? After both of these answers, I think we have a solid yes. Both of these people very clearly described a faith that you can go, yeah, I understand what that person believes. Now, I'm not going to quote anyone here who I think missed the point of the question, though there were a couple of those. I got some answers that were just quoting others and not offering their own beliefs. Some did things like paste religious historical texts to answer the question, which I would say, let me just tell you, I fully understand. I used to do something very similar. When I was newly ordained, I was given the assignment of teaching classes. I'd teach a class on church history. I'd teach a class on liturgy. I'd teach a class on particular books of the Bible. I did that a lot, teaching about books of the Bible. And in those early years, I would show up for my class with my research completed, my notes typed and ready to go. And this next point is important. I would bring a stack of the reference books that I had used. Sometimes I would have to make 2 trips because I would bring as many as 15 books down from my office. Now, I would take these books and I would stack them up on either side of the podium from which I was going to speak. Now, let me tell you why. In my mind, I brought the books in case someone asked for a particular citation that I had referenced in the class. They never did. Never did. As I became more comfortable in my role as a teacher and spiritual guide, I started leaving the books behind because I realized that I had brought them to the class as a shield of authority. You can't challenge me or question my position because I have referenced all of these works, these authoritative works that you see in front of you. I wanted to speak in a way that allowed me to, hide behind a shield of unquestionable authority. And I did that in my early days of teaching. So some of the people who answered my question, they didn't say anything about personal belief. They just quoted some official documents of the church authority. As I said, I understand because they were doing the same thing that I used to do. I will answer with what I hope is the kind of authority that cannot be questioned nor challenged. Oh, and in response to my question, some just felt it was well, an impossible task. It can't be done. No sense trying. Look, if this little exercise did anything, it left me impressed by how many people absolutely nailed it. How many people were able to achieve this. It was really cool and exciting. Now, before any of us feels intimidated by this, remember that these people weren't actually put on the spot in the back of a bus, somebody asking them about their faith, or an alien who had abducted them into a flying saucer.
We do not do that.
The point being,
as far as you know,
is that people who answered had time to think about their answers, and they weren't really put on the spot. And so, if you wanted to try something like this, don't read these as, oh, I've got to come up with something like this off the top of my head. You can take some time to think about it. As I said, the point of all of this would be that it is a powerful exercise for each of us to think about what we believe. Fortunately, you aren't going to be expected to speak it in front of whatever your faith group is or a congregation. It's just an opportunity to consider what you believe, and that's really all for today. Just imagine that a new friend asks you, let's say, to have coffee, and tells you that they've been thinking about God, and they know you're a person of faith, so they want to hear about what you believe and why. Now, you think they're asking about your church, and you may therefore get excited and respond with something like, oh, I'd be happy to tell you all about my Baptist, my Presbyterian, my Methodist, my Lutheran, my Catholic, my Episcopal, whatever, my church, because I just love it. And they say, no. That's not what I want to hear. I'm interested in you. I'm interested in your faith. What parts of the faith are meaningful to you and why? Now, knowing that you're going to have this conversation in the future, what would you say and why? So you've made it to the end of this. Please like, subscribe, ring the bell. It really helps this brand new channel grow. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below if you want to tell me what you believe, if you want to tell me what you think about this video, or if just suggest a topic for future episodes. And on your spiritual journey, may you ask questions, seek answers, and boldly go wherever the quest takes you.
Thanks for joining us here today and being part of the SkyPilot Faith Quest community. This is a great place to ask questions you wouldn't feel comfortable or safe asking in other places. And remember, the sign of a strong faith, solid religion, or healthy spiritual journey is not certainty, but that you keep asking questions.